My soul, the way of the masters is thinner than the thinnest. What blocked Solomon's way was an ant. Night and day, the lover's tears never end. Tears of blood, remembering the beloved. The lover is outcast and idle, they used to tell me. It's true. It happened to me. I tried to make sense of the 4 books until love arrived, and it all became a single syllable. You who claim to be dervishes and to never do what God forbids, the only time you're free of sin is when you're in His hands. 2 people were talking. One said, "I wish I could see this Yunus." "I've seen him," the other says. "He's just another old lover." What a wonderful poem this is. You can just feel the love oozing out of Yunus Emre. I love especially how the poem begins by Yunus addressing his own soul. It's as if Yunus has transcended mind, body, and soul to become the beloved. And judging by the passionate language he uses here, it's hard not to imagine him connecting so deeply with God that the veil separating the two is removed, and Yunus is none other than God Himself. This is a very subtle but important part in understanding what it means to walk on the way of the masters. No matter who we are, when we start our spiritual journey, there is an incredibly deep-rooted sense of self. We view God, Source, consciousness, as separate from us rather than a part of us. We have a name, body, history, life, and beliefs that we perceive to make up our entire identity. But as we walk further along this mystic path, we learn this is the biggest illusion in life. Because our true identity is actually God. And what we perceive with our senses and thoughts is merely a veil covering that divine self within. Very few of us, however, will actually understand this, let alone experience it. Which is why Yunus says, the way of the masters is thinner than the thinnest. You can almost imagine a narrow bridge connecting an island, or what we can call our individual self, to the mainland, which represents God. We live our entire lives on the island thinking that it is the entire world, not knowing there is a vaster and greater world beyond our tiny little island. Some of us will find that bridge, and thus begin their spiritual journey. Even fewer will actually walk on the bridge or make progress on that journey. And even fewer than that will actually make their way across the bridge and reunite with God, while countless others will unfortunately fall off the bridge and drown in the ego's ocean of individualism. So, if you understand this, then it becomes easier to unpack this poem. It's essentially an intimate conversation between the lower self, or Yunus's soul, and the higher self, which is God, or Yunus, after awakening. God is essentially telling Yunus's soul how to cross the bridge and reunite with him. And he's not only telling Yunus how to do it, he's telling all of us how to do it, if we can just surrender and pay attention to his signs. And the way to successfully cross this bridge and reach the mainland is to annihilate one's self or ego, the I that we have fallen madly in love with. Only by emptying ourselves of ourselves will we be light enough to cross this bridge. You can get a sense of Yunus's religious background and training when he makes reference to King Solomon by saying what blocked Solomon's way was an ant. He references an interesting passage from the Quran to explain the challenges of walking on this narrow path. In the passage, the Quran tells of how King Solomon, a revered prophet in Islam, encountered a valley of ants with his army one day. On seeing Solomon and his army arrive, a female ant warned all the other ants to leave their homes so as to not get crushed by the crowd's footsteps. But being granted with the divine gift to speak with and understand the language of animals, Solomon laughs and happily changes direction to avoid crushing the ants. This well-known story obviously has a deeper, mystical meaning. By saying what blocked Solomon's way was an ant, Yunus could mean to say that even something that we perceive as small and insignificant as an ant can actually make us change course and fall off the bridge to God. To truly reunite with God, we need to completely eradicate our sense of self until all we perceive is God, until all we are is God. Whether we face an elephant on the bridge or an ant, it makes no difference. Any worldly obstacle, be it our pride, our money, our status, our knowledge, anything that can enhance that sense of self can take us off this bridge. But by constantly remembering the beloved, we can move closer to our true home and ultimate reality. This is what we see in the next stanza. Yunus is crying day and night in joy and humility in front of his beloved. The tears never end, which shows how supreme our highest self is. Regardless if we have a momentary mystic moment or achieve complete awakening, many of us will at some point in our spiritual journey experience this tear-inducing bliss in some degree or another. We will experience just how vast we really are, and at the same time, just how small our ego is. This humbling experience is both comforting and painful. It's comforting in the sense that we feel like we are not alone in life, that there is always a protector, always someone who will love us no matter what, and who wants us to reach a level of peace and happiness we can't even imagine. But at the same time, the experience can be painful, as seen by the tears of blood. Painful in the sense that once we perceive the beloved in our lives, all we crave is to be more and more connected with it. We simply can't get enough of the beloved, nor do we ever want to go back to the way we lived before. And this desire for union is not the clingy, desperate attachment one person might have for another under a facade of love. It's a recognition that the beloved is our only origin, our only home, and that the whole purpose of life is to return back to this origin. Only then will we ever be at complete peace. After the second stanza, we then transition from Yunus's communion with God to his own life experiences and relations with the people around him. There's an interesting line here that the lover is outcast and idle. It's true. It happened to me. On the surface, this can be a frightening thing. Who really wants to be outcast and have nothing to do all day? No matter how much we prefer solitude, there is still a part of us that craves community, that craves being seen, acknowledged, and recognized by others. And conversely, there is a part of us that detests being shunned, being marginalized, or even being laughed at or ridiculed. So let's repeat the question. Who would ever wish such a fate upon themselves? Only a true lover. Because the outcast and idle here are not actually bad attributes. Being outcast in this instance means to be detached from this material and individualistic world, to not be so consumed by making money and gaining the admiration of others among other countless worldly pursuits. Said differently, one literally has to be an outcast of the island of self in order to cross the bridge and reach God. If you are so tied down by your status, pride, knowledge, money, relationships, ego, how will you ever walk this path? And it's not just being outcast that is important. Being idle is necessary too. Now, this is not a license to be lazy and do nothing with our lives, but rather a recognition that our lives are becoming more and more busy. We hardly have time for ourselves these days, let alone time for the people we love. Most of us are sucked into a rat race, not knowing what it is we're really after, or why we're struggling to stay happy and peaceful for long. While there is a time for doing and being active, there is also a time for being, which is so fundamentally ignored by society. Thus, being outcast and idle here is critical to make progress on the way. And Yunus isn't just paying lip service. He actually had to experience these sacrifices himself, from leaving a busy and social life for a calmer and more reflective one to walk down the real path. As we learn in his biography, Yunus had a pretty successful life prior to becoming a dervish and mystic. He was a well-respected judge with a solid education and high standing in the community. But he was more interested in putting up a facade in front of others than he was in leaving all of his knowledge and intellect behind to experience true love. That is, of course, until he met and studied under Immerse. This brings us to my favorite line of the entire poem. I tried to make sense of the 4 books until love arrived and it all became a single syllable. This line summarizes so much of our spiritual journey. We spend years accumulating knowledge and wisdom from virtually everything we can get our hands on, including religious scriptures. But we rarely ever search deep inside. We rarely quiet the mind to listen to the one voice that is constantly whispering and inscribing divine wisdom in our hearts. Just one experience of this love can shatter all. And Yunus knew this very well. Prior to becoming a Sufi and traveling on the way, Yunus studied everything, including the 4 books, which are known to be the Torah, the Psalms, the Gospel, and the Quran. But in the end, all of this knowledge became a single syllable. While religious scriptures do contain immense wisdom and instructions for living a more righteous and virtuous life, they don't necessarily instruct on how to annihilate the ego. There's a wonderful poem by Hakim Sanoi that explains this so eloquently. He said, "Belief and learning led the way, but failed at your door. Only by yielding into your mystery was I invited in. Only by yielding into the Beloved's mystery and accepting his divine love can we destroy our ego. And this love comes not so much from seeking, but rather from surrendering. Surrendering everything we think we are and letting go of the egoic instinct to try to know everything. No one is free from the ego unless they choose to be, unless they choose to walk the way of the masters. Even the Sufi dervishes that inspired Yunus to explore and become love aren't exactly free of the ego all the time. We see this in the 5th stanza. You who claim to be dervishes and to never do what God forbids, the only time you're free of sin is when you're in His hands. Yunus is using a religious analogy to illustrate this point. Here, the sin refers to being attached to or identified with the ego. In other words, being unconscious and unaware of one's true essence, and thus experiencing the ultimate suffering in this life. On the flip side, being free of sin is when one has awakened to the ultimate truth and accepted the beloved as their true reality. Thus, the only time one is free of sin is when they have annihilated their sense of self and surrendered themselves completely to God's hands. Two people were talking. One said, "I wish I could see this Yunus." "I've seen him," the other says. "He's just another old lover." Clearly, the new Yunus is a bit of a shock to the people at first, given the person he was prior to his transformation. What was once a proud and arrogant man has now been broken and recreated into a humble dervish, poet, and mystic. And in the process, Yunus's eyes were open to the deepest love and divine wisdom. But the interesting part is that unless one actually walks on this path themselves, unless they've actually crossed the bridge, they will never know what it's truly like. Awakening is akin to death. We never know what's on the other side of the veil until we cross it. So, while others may dismiss the new Yunus as just another old lover, what they might fail to realize is that this old lover has experienced the ultimate peace and bliss and returned to his true home. He has overcome the perpetual suffering of the world, as Buddha described it, to attain complete knowledge and insight. No one can see the full effects of his transformation on the outside because the real change happens within. And so, Yunus ends this poem superbly by giving us the perspective of those who are still stuck on their islands. But for him, it matters not. He is experiencing a bliss and joy many of us can only dream of having.